The Catfish Sisters by Lisa M. Bradley. Mississippi, 1874. Blood in the Water. The Catfish Sisters, those blue barbled twins, that sleek school of two who learned the ways of Big River at its birth, and knew the water as they knew each other, intimately, tasting with the whole of their sneaky, scaleless bodies, those queer kin who sometimes surfaced in full moonlight and stepped ashore as young women. Well, one year, when Big River's northern banks slept under snow and its denizens sank low under the frozen slab, where water still rolled dark and sluggish as a fall-fattened bear, a ritual, both regular and right, these sisters swam south, dreaming of that realm where autumn holds, where water oaks still weep golden leaves and cicadas grieve summer's retreat, where cargo-toting steamboats leaf Big River with lamplight medallions and the plash of paddle-boats moon-woven with steam, whistle, and horn soothe the shore like Big River's very own hush and snore. But near that Louisiana bend that shoots north into a thin curve before turning toward the sea again, a strong scent invaded the sisters' dream. Not the expected brine of their beloved Birdfoot Delta, but a loathsome effluvium assailed the sisters' ultrasensitive skin. Downstream, something more foul than sediment rucked up by bridge building or boat traffic, but not so caustic as the chromium salts cast off from leather-working tan yards, but neither as sweetly rich as slaughterhouse runoff. Instead, human blood corrupted Big River. Not so unusual since the war, but here in a quantity too great to ignore. Speeding up, seeking the poison source, the sisters met a wave of river folk fleeing in the opposite direction, but none would stop to answer any question. So the sisters swam on, bounding round the thin curve and plunged south into tragedy. Oh, the death throes roiling the waters, the gauntlet of bleeding, thrashing bodies, sick with the flavors of blood and terror flooding through their fishy flesh, singeing their synapses. The sisters came face to face with a gamut of human shapes, all ages and sizes, that seemed to have but one thing in common: the dark color of their dead or disfigured skin. Whatever had stricken them, the sisters surmised, was not aquatic, but those who still survived, could they be saved? Already, the panicked turbulence waned. Soon the victim's endurance, too, must fade. So thinking, the sisters rushed to catch on their backs a sinking child with braids. They pushed the small form to the surface, praying to hear some cough or struggle for smoke-sharpened air. But the child breathed no more, nor moved, except where the water played with their hair. Big River carried them all several miles as the sisters streaked from one body to the next, exulting when they guided a person, still breathing, to shore, grieving as eel grass claimed many more. Finally, only a young man, weakly treading water, remained. One sister slid under each arm, and, large as the sisters were, the biggest blue catfish the man had ever seen, they easily lifted his chin above the waves, a lucky thing. Otherwise his alarmed gasp might have been his very last. The young man, just old enough to bear a beard, favored one arm, and when they shifted it, they must have unknit a healing wound, for blood bloomed from his shoulder. The sisters, exhausted, overcome by the surfeit of blood surrounding them, succumbed as if to a spell. Skin filtering, but untasting, eyes open, but unseeing, barbels touching, but unfeeling. And who knows how long they might have drifted in that odd half-life, had the man not sagged unconscious and started slipping from their backs. Now, close as the Catfish Sisters always swam alongside one another, they did not, as some legends swore, share a rib, but perhaps they shared a mind, for as one they seemed to decide, damned if we can wait for night, simply to be hidden from human sight, and what does it matter if this area is country or town? The man's fought too hard for us to let him drown. Thus they lifted him again and propelled him toward a stand of scouring rush, and with mighty effort, heedless of who might see the shift, they grew legs to climb the river bank and arms to haul him clear. The Sole Survivor. The man woke with a start, bleary eyes darting about the small camp hidden among black gum trees and curtained by purple woodbine. As he tried to rise from his leaf-litter bed, a wrenching pain reminded him of his wound. He cried out, but his throat, raw from purging river water, emitted only a strangled vowel. Nevertheless, the sound summoned from the shadows his saviors, who came forth shushing to ensure he didn't lose the poultice of yarrow and plantain plugging his shoulder. He recoiled, clutching his bloody shirt, draped over him like a sheet, when the weak campfire revealed his nurses to be two women, so white under mismatched attire they looked nearly blue, and at first he was too terrified to speak. The sisters asked simple questions in several tongues, till finally the man calmed and croaked out his name and hometown. Tendrils of the sisters' blue-black hair drifted about their faces, as if lifted by the breeze of Jacob's breath, as he told how his people in V-burg had been attacked by white folks who couldn't accept a black man as sheriff. The sisters blinked their wide-set, pale button eyes, perplexed by the notion of a sheriff and the punishment of many for the actions of one. Jacob closed his eyes a moment, suppressing pain and impatience before explaining. They go by the name Whiteliners, but it's the selfsame clan. They're beside themselves now that black folks are voting, same as them and worse, as they see it, winning. They're shamed by the mere idea of a black man holding power over them. You think they cotton to the reality of Mr. Peter Crosby, sheriff? They won't abide the election. They can't even stand the sight of black folk who don't suffer every single second of their lives. Seeing a glint of grim understanding now kindled in the sisters' eyes, Jacob wondered who these soft-jawed, drift-haired women were that he had to connect every dot. The war began, one sister. Is not over? Said the other. Jacob snorted. Not in Mississippi. Maybe on paper, maybe up north, but the South simply declared a new enemy, Reconstruction. With the blood he'd lost, Jacob had lost all memory, too, of being saved by twin giant catfish. But just now he remembered the general wisdom of keeping his mouth shut around white women. Then again, there was that bit in the Bible, for some have entertained angels unawares. But there was surely something strange about these two white, two quiet ladies, like all the languages they knew and the recent events they did not. So, fiery, Jacob forged ahead. He said, "These angry white people, so many. Some from other counties, some from other states. They came to grab us off the streets. They dragged us from our homes and beds, our very own businesses. Some of us escaped. The rest, well, we got the same as ever." He pointed at his shoulder. Lynched, whipped, shot. The Whiteliners were on the rampage for 10 days. Only when Governor Ames sent General Grant our way with reinforcements did their madness fade. And only because how were they, the good citizens of V-burg, to explain all these corpses. They wanted blood, but not the blame. So to hide their shame, they set torches to our side of town. Shop fire sparks tragedy, the papers said. Those of us too stubborn for death, too far to drag to the flames, we got tossed in Old Man River. In what? Asked the sisters. And seeing their shared look of consternation, spooked by their query in unison, Jacob quickly replied, The Mississippi. And the sisters nodded, satisfied with the Anishinaabe title. But by now Jacob had remembered the book of Ezekiel and just why angels might appear in disguise. And as he'd told his tale, the grim enlightenment in the women's eyes had blazed to full-fledged wrath. Not, he thought, directed at him, but on his behalf, or perhaps that of all V. Berg's victims. Not being the target of their ire made it no easier to endure, especially when the sisters paced round the fire. One clockwise, one widdershins, their pallid skin slickening despite the cold, and bits of blue-black hair waving about their faces like the barbels they actually were, unbeknownst to him. Although his aches were as an anchor, Jacob struggled from his low bed and begged to be released. Of course, he was neither prisoner nor captive, but the sisters had history with humans and chose not to hinder his sudden hurry. They merely handed him more yarrow, advising he search for a healer who'd once lived in Dewberry Hollow, for even if she'd long since gone to rest, surely she'd have trained an apprentice. Jacob thanked the sisters profusely, but his every drop of sweat, each pained breath, radiated primal fear, so the sisters nodded only once, then mercifully turned their backs on him. Once his footsteps faded, the sisters doused the campfire and slipped away like smoke. Much as they itched and wished to shed their stolen clothesline attire, they remained dressed, lest they court even more danger hiding in nude human form near the shore. Amid trees, shaggy with cold withered creeper, they watched for the right moment to run for Big River. Sun was halfway through its daily stroll, and though few humans staked claim to this stretch of Big River, those who did moved nimbly among their rugged nests and nature. There the sisters waited, and over the hours betwixt the two, a plot wordlessly emerged. A great debate. The river folk were disturbed by the Catfish Sisters' explanation for why Big River had turned into a mass grave. Surely there must be blight or famine, a walleye hypothesized. Some incredible strain for the humans to turn on their own kind. Alas, no, the sisters said. A long-nosed Gar pointed out, if they were truly starving, wouldn't they eat one another? Agreement rippled through the folk, many of whom had already fed on the dead, believing, if we let them go to waste, we're just as bad as the human race. Next, a paddlefish spoke for the lamprey on his back. But it's ridiculous. You, sisters, have walked among the grounded and told us how wide their realm stretches, how high it soars. There must be room enough for all the grounded. Why must humans be so absurd? A mudbug, recently molted, unearthed herself to blurt, Didn't they just have a war about this? I thought they'd gotten sorted. Hear, hear, rang from all quarters. The Catfish Sisters rattled their pectoral fins for order. It's unwise to ponder human behavior longer than strictly necessary, lest we too fall out of harmony. Kin, we cannot trust V. Berg humans not to poison Big River with hate again, nor do we believe they should benefit from this sacred source they've profaned. We should punish this port city by moving Big River away. The river folk gaped in awed silence at the suggestion of a course correction. All except for a late migrating eel, who finished her feast of glass shrimp and said, with mucilagynous sneer. If I remember right, the humans tried to divert Big River just so years ago, and you fought them tooth and scale. She slithered away, ignoring a carp's retort. That was different. We won't be moved by war. A spectacle case muscle, roused from hibernation by the great debate, took up the old chant, Grant, cannot, canal us. But most folk were undeterred from debate. A soft-shell turtle paddled up to say, We worked awfully hard to preserve Big River's thin fin curve, even when currents and sediments seemed content to take the shorter route. Now you want us to do the reverse? The sisters said, Then, we could not bow to human force. They were using Big River to move their munitions. We couldn't allow them to turn the river itself into a weapon. But did you know, Berg was a problem even then? Grant's Canal was intended to bypass the town's cannons. Were it not for their warlike ways, we wouldn't be in this position, not once, but twice. Timidly, a water dog remarked, But up north, Big River sleeps. To shift course without consulting all may be unwise. Indeed, agreed a pumpkin-seed sunfish, drawn from weedy shallows by the fervor of debate. If Big River moves, how many will you leave gasping, flapping in a shrinking puddle in your righteous wake? It needn't be a sudden shift, opined a river red horse, his kind increasingly rare. And some of us can't survive much more poison, really. It isn't fair. Two sturgeons, sucking leeches from the river floor, were asked for the wisdom of their years. The elder of the languid century fish solemnly said, Big River's power flows south. None up north will care about a slight deviation unless we cause flooding upriver, and we can avoid that with sufficient preparation. The second sturgeon added, Even if we all consent here, we must alert those downstream, lest we behave as irresponsibly as those wretched human beings. Moved by the folks' sagacity and fears, the Catfish Sisters declared, We hear and understand you. With no need to confer, one sister said, One of us will swim south with our proposal. The other will stay here to address your concerns. The other sister said, Come spring, we will reunite here, before heading north to announce our plan. At this stunning declaration, the river folk gasped so vastly, sucking in so much water, that Big River's surface dropped several inches. The Catfish Sisters, those interlocked twins, would willingly split for this cause? The legendary Shifter Sisters would endure seasons apart? Shocked, fearful of what such separation might portend, the folk assured the sisters they needn't take such drastic measures. Rather, they vowed to rally their neighbors and achieve accord to prepare and surge into action the moment they received the final word. So it was that the Catfish Sisters spent the little fall left and winter, too, working toward the sea, telling Jacob's story to all, and entreating their southern kin to agree. A detour round that devil town of Berg was downright necessary. They reasoned, they argued, they wheedled and cajoled. Truth be told, they spent half their time two-legged to secure some delicacy or bauble they might use to sway reluctant members of the fold. Meanwhile, otters and raccoons, incensed by the suggested territorial changes, hired their own advocate to reach Big River's southernmost ranges. This surly, yellow-crowned night heron harangued the sisters throughout the Birdfoot Delta, decrying the course shift. Fortunately, few Southerners seemed persuaded by his claims of great injustice. Could clipping such a minor meander, they asked, really make much difference? The Southerners, blessed with an abundance of waterways and shorelines, assumed the riparians could always migrate. Besides, the Southerners said, it wasn't their concern what occurred miles upriver. They probably wouldn't even notice, what with the commotion of Gulf commerce and travel. In any case, one afternoon the riparians' advocate so annoyed an algae-masked alligator, hitherto hanging in the water, like an invisible anchor, that she launched herself into the reeds and devoured the bloviating heron, and thereafter the sisters met little resistance to their plan. The Heave-Ho. The Catfish Sisters, those blue-veined spinsters, that strange school of two who knew the Mississippi curves like kin, like the fish-belly fair skin on the backs of their twins' hands. They returned in spring, their skirts hitched up to their ankles and their feet squelching in the muddy creek that would soon be the new route of the venerable Big River, and alongside the maidens in their mismatched, clothesline-snatched finery, snapping turtles marched over ground, helping carve a sharper path through the swamp, and the usually solitary creatures amassed in such a swarm that their clashing shells beat a military drum and startled the shy map turtles, resting in their likewise migration, off their logs and into the boggy shallows. From the red-winged blackbirds, the sisters learned that the skunks and weasels, though complaining bitterly the whole time, had for now vacated the surrounding woods, lest they be drowned when Big River flexed and turned. As they splashed along the path that would soon be home, the sisters encountered dreamy-eyed beavers eating water lilies and envisioning new empires, waterlogged chipmunks rushing from burrow to burrow with babies in tow, trying to outrun the rising water table, and consortiums of squirrels debating which trees were most likely to survive the coming upheaval. Farther out, Skipjack, small and fast, carved out the creek bed without fear of falling prey to the minks and muskrats who'd already established their dens within sight and scent of the shore. The sisters so admired the sleek swiftness of the skipjack. They morphed into mermaid form, discarding hateful human dress behind them on the bank to dive deeper into the current, where they discovered the fish folk had transported their young to nurseries upriver. Heartened that the folk here had committed so clearly to turning the tide on V. Berg, the sisters hastened to the headwaters to make proper obeisance to the northern folk. Although eager to make their case for the erasure of old coastlines and the bold calligraphy of new, even the sisters were surprised by how short and smooth their persuasion proved, thanks to messages sent ahead by the century-old sturgeons. With the bite of ice ever in their blood, the northern folk were as ferocious for justice, some might say revenge, as the southern folk had been laissez-faire, some might say lazy. The representative chosen to speak for the northerners was a 10-foot yellow alligator gar with scales like bone armor. Certain snowmelts, he explained, his voice whistling between a double row of jagged upper teeth, were being held in strategic reserve, and at a specific moon phase those frigid waters would be unleashed to aid those downriver in accomplishing the course change. Finally came the night the Mississippi River would slough those wretched banks in favor of a fresh path. A few lonesome boats gently rocked, docked at a pier south of V. Berg. On one, a hitched horse wove back and forth on her front legs, lips flapping fretfully at the eerie currents. A week before, more ships had frequented those shores, but even humans can read nature's broader signs, and had progressed from whisper and worry to open conjecture about the wax and wane of the river. They had plans, and, indeed, would have had time to wean, were the river's shift natural, not part of a retaliatory scheme. The purple warty-back clams began a cheerleading chant. "We'll be loud, we'll be clear, we don't want hate dumped here," as the folk gathered before the creek that soon would supersede the thin fin curve. At the sister signal, the folk knit themselves fin to fin, claw to shell, and in a single chimeric mass surged forward, shoving a wall of water fast before them into the channel. Turf was torn asunder, bushes twirled away like tops, and banks crumpled like shot horses. A volley of small folk were flung with such force they swirled out the other end of the channel and emerged Southerners. Once the wave winked out of sight, the mid-river folk hurried back to the starting point, led by the Catfish Sisters in mermaid form, by walleye and sauger, sturgeon and alligator gar, ancient creatures, mighty and strong, but also so deeply bonded to Big River. The tides kept time as much with the pumping of their cold hearts as with the moon's ebb and flow. Indeed, the currents sought to mirror their movements, so when again the folk gathered as one and plunged into the channel, Big River sprang after them, tearing new coastline as easily as a petticoat hem, ripping up trees by their roots and tossing boats like toys. Trapped on one such boat, the bay mare fought her hitching post, hooves hammering the deck as she squealed and snapped at the air, moonlight glaring off the whites of her wild eyes. Again, small folk were flung free of the river-moving chimera, but now the channel had widened, so the yellow perch and big-mouthed buffalo whirled over the flooded wetland rather than being shunted south. Back at the starting line, the purple warty-backs continued to rally. "Heave ho! Heave ho! The port at Viborg's got to go!" Again, the prime movers regrouped, their bodies aching from wielding so much raw power, their nerves jittery from the ice melt revenge supplied by the northern folk. The Catfish Sisters sought to encourage their kin. "Onward, brave siblings. If you could take the halfling form we do, you'd see for yourselves the change we've already wrought. But feel, dear family, surely you can feel the difference in Big River. How the water wants the shorter path, how the currents yearn to rake new beds. Take a moment to restore yourselves, but do not stop. Not until Big River is safe and ours again." While slipping among their brethren with this exhortation, the sisters learned of the horse trapped upon a boat. Horrified, they hurried to find the creature, hoping to spare her some misery. By the time they found her, froth had spread from the mare's mouth to wring her muzzle beneath flared nostrils. Panic her blinders, she swung her head from side to side, her ears pinned back tight. And the way she squealed and reared, the sisters couldn't believe neither tether nor post had snapped yet. They didn't dare take human shape and board the boat, more shipwreck now than ship, to free the maddened beast. Pitiful as her terror was to witness, they decided it best to wait until the boat capsized and swept the horse under water with it. One sister went in search of a razor-edged mussel shell. The other rushed to tell the chimera's prime movers they must continue to push without them. The clams cried out, "No more massacres! Big River must be pure!" And the very next surge of river folk toppled the boat. The mare plunged into the water and at once began bucking and twisting, turning her belly to the moon in panic. The sisters took on fully human forms, hoping to placate the horse. One gathered her courage and mounted the helpless beast. She wrapped her arms tight around that terror-corded neck and hugged with all her might, head to toes. Meanwhile, a great nebula of churned water, rucked up silt, and roiling bubbles near blinded the other sister. She forded the cloud with hands before her, reaching for the rope that threatened to drag them all down with the sinking boat. The second she seized it, she set to sawing with her mussel shell, and when that was not fast enough, she snarled and grew such fearsome, jagged teeth the alligator gar would have gnashed with envy. With 2 savage bites, she snapped through the stubborn rope, setting the mare free. Who knows how long the poor beast might have struggled still, lost in that black looking-glass realm, had the sister on her back not gripped her mane and guided her to the star-splotched surface. But once oriented, the mare swam to the warbly light, and from there plowed a marshy shore to safety. One sister slid from the horse's back, and the other hauled herself ashore, and they clasped one another, panting in relief, their heartbeats so loud in their human ears that it took some time for them to hear the cheers of their own folk. Big River had changed course. They looked around and saw that it was true. The thin fin curve was now a mere stream petering out from an oxbow lake, and the creek that the folk had made a channel was now the one way. No longer would the people of V. Berg pollute Big River with their hate. No longer would Big River serve those it reviled. The sisters embraced in celebration, but it would be hours yet before they joined their comrades' revelry. For though the majority of folk had joined their cause, the sisters remained mindful of the quiet, overlooked few. And so the Catfish Sisters, those blue-barbled twins, that sleek school of 2, still had work to do. Coda. Over 100 years later, long after the people of V. Berg twisted another, smaller river to do their bidding, folks in that port city still tell of the night the Mississippi River jumped its banks. Some whisper of the 2 women spied at dawn the next day, their awkward silhouettes, akimbo and strange, as if straining at the confines of their clothing, or aching from the effort of standing upright, shimmered on the shore of the Oxbow Lake, all that remained of the once mighty Mississippi River bend. The stories say those women, alike as twins, sisters most certainly. They had blue-black hair that shone as if wet, but tendrils of it waved in the air, on the breeze you might have thought, except there wasn't wind enough that morn to ruffle the surface of the lake or tickle a butterfly's wings. Depending on who's telling the tale, maybe they'll mention the women's ill-fitting muddy dresses, the bunched-up necklines like those ladies never learned how to manage buttons, or the obscene hemlines like they didn't know ankle from calf. Or maybe those telling the stories will be too polite for such details, and they'll focus instead on the buckets on the ladies' arms and how they scoured the puddled shore, collecting flopping fishes and weak mud bugs. They'll say it didn't seem like such a bad idea to make a silver lining supper from that unfortunate turn of the tide. But then again, the way great-great-grandpappy always told it, or Grand-Aunt Ginny, or Old Doc Walcott, there was something odd, lumpy about those women's profiles. And they seemed to croon at their catch, as if greeting old friends. And no one could say just where they'd come from, or who their people were, so none of the V. Berg citizens dared join the ladies. Sisters, some said. Twins, swore others. After all.